Dad pulled me close at the Thanksgiving table. He was smiling, the kind of wide, generous smile he wore when he had an audience worth performing for. I felt my chest loosen automatically. That stupid automatic hope. "This is my daughter," he announced, voice carrying across the whole table, loud enough for everyone. Half a second of warmth, just half a second. Then he laughed, the one who never made it. The laughter that followed was thin, forced. The obedient kind that filled space because silence felt too honest. My face burned immediately. My stomach dropped in one clean fall. Dad's hand tightened on my shoulder like a clamp. The kind of grip that said, "Don't ruin this. Don't react. Don't embarrass me in front of my people." Someone said, "Oh, stop," but they were already smiling when they said it. My stepmother beamed like the whole thing was adorable. I swallowed hard, forced a smile, bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood. But inside, something went quiet and cold. Not hurt exactly. Something underneath the hurt. Something that didn't bend or spill over. I will not beg for dignity at a table that feeds on my humiliation. That thought sat inside me like a key. My name is Esme Lang. I've been almost my whole life. Almost stable enough, almost finished enough, almost good enough for a father who only understood love as a trophy he could display. In the bathroom, I gripped the sink and breathed the way you breathed when you were trying to keep your ribs from cracking under the pressure of something you couldn't say out loud. In the mirror, I said it quietly. "You're not a joke." When I walked back out, Dad was already retelling something, describing my phase, taking the years when I'd held everything together during impossible circumstances and repackaging them as laziness. My stepmother laughed too loud. The specific laugh of someone performing understanding they didn't actually have. Dad caught my eye, smiled like he owned something. Then he leaned close. "Relax," he murmured. "I'm just motivating you." Motivating. He didn't think he'd hurt me. He genuinely believed he'd coached me. That humiliation in front of an audience was a gift he was giving, and that was somehow worse than if he'd known exactly what he was doing. Because people who know they're hurting you can change. People who believe they're helping never see the need to. I left early, claimed a headache. Dad didn't stop me. He called after me across the porch as I reached the steps. "Don't be dramatic, Esme." I kept walking. In the car, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I drove a few blocks and pulled over because I couldn't trust my hands to stay steady enough for the highway. I called Marlo. She answered before the second ring and didn't start with hello. She started with, "Tell me." I told her everything, the hand on the shoulder, the pause he'd used for effect, the laughter, my stepmother's face. The words motivated. When I finished, Marlo was quiet for exactly one beat. "He humiliated you," she said. "No hedging." "It was a joke," I said. The lie tasted wrong the moment it left. Marlo said, "Did you laugh?" I didn't answer. "Then it wasn't a joke," she said. "A joke is something both people find funny." I sat in my car in the dark of a residential street I didn't know. Something became clear to me there. I'd been living my entire adult life trying to avoid his disappointment, adjusting, shrinking, excusing, and he'd been using that compliance to keep me close enough to step on. That arrangement was ending tonight. The memory surfaced on the drive home, sharp and specific. Mom's sick, medical bills spread across the kitchen counter like an accusation. Dad standing in the hallway with a bag, saying he needed to clear his head. He was gone for 6 days. I was 19. I dropped 2 classes, picked up extra shifts at both jobs, learned to navigate insurance phone trees the way some people learn to drive. Out of necessity. Out of there being no one else. I wasn't failing during those months. I was surviving. But Dad's version of that time was different. In his telling, I quit because I couldn't handle pressure. I gave up. I lacked what it took. He'd told that story so many times in so many rooms that some part of me had started to half believe it. That night, I opened my old school enrollment portal, stared at the credits I hadn't finished. My chest tightened with something I recognized as grief. For the years spent on other things before I could get back to myself. I whispered the words into the empty apartment. "I'm going to finish." Not to prove anything to him. To reclaim something that had always been mine. That was different. That was entirely different. Dad called 2 days later. Cheerful voice, easy tone, like the dinner had never happened, like the words had been exhaled and simply dissolved. I've been thinking, he said. I want to help you get on your feet. My stomach turned over. His help always had architecture. A specific shape designed to make me owe something. To make whatever I built belong to the story he was telling about himself. He offered me a placement at a friend's car dealership, just to stabilize while you figure out what you actually want. Figure out. Like my life was a disorganized desk he'd graciously offered to sort. I already know what I want, I said. Silence. Then a short laugh. Sure you do, I declined, politely, without drama. His tone sharpened immediately. So you'd rather stay stuck? Stuck, the word he reached for when my boundaries inconvenienced his narrative. The word that reframed my choices as failure and his interference as rescue. I said I had to go. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but my decision was completely still. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I was building, and I was done asking his permission to want it. The relatives came next, text messages, one after another, spread out over 3 days like something coordinated. Your dad just worries about you. He means well. You know how he is. You should be grateful he still includes you in everything. Includes you. Like my attendance at his dinner table was a favor requiring ongoing thanks. One aunt wrote, maybe if you had something more stable going on, he wouldn't feel the need to say those things. I almost responded. The defensive reply was already forming, logical and clear. Then I stopped. Because I understood the trap. Arguing in the family group chat was exactly where Dad's version of events was designed to be defended. He controlled the tone there. He had the relationships. He had years of narrative built up around my name. I would be dismissed before I finished typing. I screenshot each message instead, created a folder on my phone, named it Narrative. Not to be petty. Not to collect ammunition for something explosive. But because I was done letting other people describe what had happened to me without any record of what they'd actually said. I was building a different kind of evidence, the kind that existed in timestamps and screenshots, the kind no one could tell me I'd imagined. I enrolled in the Accelerated Medical Billing Certification Program on a Thursday afternoon. Steady work, clear path, real, consistent pay once I finished. The kind of career that didn't require anyone's approval to be valid. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody would make a toast about it, but it was mine. Every credit of it. Marlo helped me build a budget and a study schedule. We sat at her kitchen table with a spreadsheet and worked it out hour by hour. The first time I sat down to study for real, I cried. Not from sadness exactly. From the feeling of climbing out of something thick and heavy. Like all those years of surviving and adjusting had formed a layer over me, and studying meant pushing through it. I pushed through it. That same week, Dad posted a photo online with my stepmother. A smiling picture from some event. The caption read, "Thankful for family, especially the ones who made it." I looked at it for a long time. The ones who made it, said in a way designed to be general, meaning something specific. He needed a contrast. He needed the ones who didn't. He needed me. And I was busy becoming someone he couldn't use that way anymore. A cousin's birthday dinner happened 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. I went because I loved my cousin and because staying away felt like giving Dad unearned real estate in my choices. He introduced me again. I should have anticipated it. I didn't. "This is Esme," he said warmly. "She's still figuring things out." Polite smiles around the table. I opened my mouth. Dad spoke over me. "She's sensitive, so be gentle with her." He laughed. Easy. Practiced. The laugh that turned my dignity into a footnote. Sensitive. Said like a warning. Like I was fragile cargo people needed to handle carefully. I breathed once. Slowly. "I'm in school currently," I said. "And working." Dad blinked. The blink of someone surprised by a prop behaving independently. "Oh," he said. Light, dismissive. "That's cute." Cute. My effort, my enrollment, my schedule, my sleepy Tuesday nights studying while working a full day. Cute. I swallowed what I wanted to say, not because I was afraid of him, because I was learning something important. Arguing my worth to someone whose status depended on denying it was a conversation I could only lose. I needed different conditions. I needed different ground. Dad's stepmother cornered me in the kitchen an hour later. She was smiling. The smile that presented itself as warmth and was actually surveillance. "Your father talks about how much he helps you," she said. Conversational. Light. I kept my face still. "In what way?" She tilted her head. Well, he says he helps with rent sometimes, when you're between things. The air left the room. I stood very still. He doesn't help with my rent, I said. He's never paid any of my bills. Her smile flickered. Well, I'm sure it's just... My bills are mine, I said. I pay them myself. She looked uncertain now. Like she'd walked into a conversation she thought she understood and found something different inside it. I'm sure he just means it in a general way, she said finally. Retreating. She left the kitchen. I stood at the counter for a moment. The rage came fast, hot, and immediate. Then it cooled into something much more useful, because I understood what was happening now. Dad wasn't just humiliating me in rooms where I was standing. He was telling a different story in rooms where I wasn't. A story where he was generous and patient in carrying me. A story worth investigating. I pulled 3 months of bank statements that same night. Every deposit, every incoming transfer, every labeled transaction. Nothing from Dad. Not a single dollar. Not once. I called my aunt the next morning, kept my voice carefully neutral, asked what she'd heard from Dad about my situation. She hesitated. The kind of hesitation that answered the question before the words did. He said you'd been struggling, she admitted. That he was quietly covering some things for you. He said you were too proud to ask for help directly. My hands went cold. Did you send him money? I asked. A long pause. Yes, she said, very quietly. I sat down. On the floor, actually. Because my legs made a decision my brain hadn't approved. I asked her the amount, she told me. I wrote it down. Then I asked her to please not tell him we'd spoken. She agreed. That night I created a second folder. Named it Funds. Started filling it with dates and names and amounts. I worked carefully. Precisely. Like building something that needed to hold weight. My hands shook the whole time, but my thinking had never been clearer. I invited Dad for coffee, neutral location, neutral time of day. Kept my voice completely even when I asked him directly, had he been telling people he was supporting me financially? He smiled immediately, the patient smile, the one that said I was a child misunderstanding something obvious. People worry, he said. I reassure them. You reassure them with lies, I said. His eyes went hard. Fast. Watch your tone. I kept my voice completely steady. Did you accept money from relatives for my benefit? He laughed. Sharp. A single sound. Don't be ridiculous. Then he leaned forward, voice dropping to something that wanted to sound gentle and landed as threat. You should be grateful, he said, that anyone cares about you at all. The cruelty in that sentence landed clean and clear. I stood up, put on my coat, picked up my bag. Dad looked surprised. He'd expected crying or arguing or the frozen compliance he'd always gotten. I said, thank you for meeting me. Outside, I sat in my car with shaking hands, but I replayed his response in my mind. He hadn't denied it. He'd deflected. And deflection, I was learning, was confession wearing more comfortable clothing. Within 4 days, Dad's behavior changed. Calls at strange hours, dropping by unannounced at times that weren't convenient, questions that presented themselves as concern and functioned as inventory. Where are you working? Who are you spending time with? How are things looking financially? Marlo listened to the pattern and said, he's trying to get out ahead of whatever you're building. She was right. He could feel something shifting. Couldn't name it yet. But the sensors he'd developed for managing me were registering something different. Then a text arrived on a Sunday evening. I want to be there when you finish your program. I love watching my kids succeed. My kids. I read it 3 times. He was preparing to claim the credit. Before I'd even finished, before the work was done, he was already positioning himself in the narrative of my success. Ready to stand next to me at whatever table I eventually sat at and tell people he'd always believed in me. I screenshot the text, added it to the narrative folder, then went back to studying. His claim on my story was ending. I was almost ready. My program advisor emailed me on a Wednesday. Professional tone. Careful wording. She said she'd received a call from someone identifying themselves as family. The caller had expressed concern about my stress levels and asked whether the program was the right fit for me, given some background context they'd shared. Background context. My program advisor reassured me my enrollment was fully secure. She'd flagged the account for enhanced privacy as a precaution. I sat at my desk for a while after reading that email. Not afraid of losing the program. She'd been clear. Grieving, because this was my father. Not someone peripheral. Not someone I'd tried to cut out. My father. And he was actively making calls designed to undermine my standing in the one place I was building something real. Because if I finished and succeeded and stood on my own, the story he'd been selling about me stopped being useful. The daughter who never made it needed to keep not making it. I documented the email carefully, noted the date, wrote what she'd told me in my own words, added it to my folder, and kept studying, because the best response to someone trying to put out a fire was to make it burn bigger. Marlo introduced me to a study group that met Wednesday evenings. Women building careers carefully and consistently. No announcing, no performances, no tables requiring applause. Just people asking each other what they needed and then trying to provide it. The contrast was overwhelming at first. I kept waiting for someone to ask why I hadn't finished sooner, why I hadn't chosen something more impressive, why I'd taken such a roundabout path. Nobody asked. They asked what material I was working on. They asked if I'd eaten. They shared notes. My grades started climbing. Something that had felt like climbing through mud in the first weeks started feeling like movement. I was actually moving. That same week, Dad posted again. Public post. Nothing tagged. No names. Some people just don't have the ambition. And that's okay. Not everyone's built for it. I looked at it. He could sense my momentum from wherever he was observing, and he was still trying to reach across the distance and press down on me. I closed the app, opened my textbook. The momentum was stronger than his reach. I was counting on that. A message arrived from an unexpected source. My uncle's husband, Kellen. We'd spoken maybe a handful of times at family events, pleasant but peripheral. He'd found me through the family messaging app. I heard some things recently, he wrote. I want you to know that if you ever need someone to confirm what was said in certain conversations, I'll do that for you. I read it twice, asked him carefully what he'd heard. He told me Dad had been at a barbecue 2 weekends ago, had mentioned me several times, had described his ongoing financial support of me in some detail, had talked about how it made him feel to be that kind of parent, how it reflected on who he was. He said it made him look good, Kellen wrote. Those exact words. Look good. Not that it helped me, not that it mattered to me, that it made him look good. It didn't sit right with me, Kellen added. It didn't sound like someone describing care. It sounded like someone describing an investment. I sat with that message for a long time, because I'd been starting to wonder whether I was seeing something that wasn't there, whether I was making a mountain from something smaller. Kellen's message told me I wasn't. Someone else had been in the room and felt it too. I spoke with 2 more relatives over the following 2 weeks. Both conversations were careful, gentle. I didn't accuse, I just asked questions and listened. Both relatives had given Dad money. Both had been told the same story. Esme is struggling. I'm handling it quietly. She's too proud to accept help directly. Anything you can give helps me help her. One relative said, voice full of embarrassment, I thought I was helping you. My chest tightened. You were trying to, I said. That's completely different from what he did. After the second call, I sat with Marlo and told her everything. She listened all the way through, then said practically, what do you want to do? I already knew. I was going to repay every cent, directly to each person, with a simple note attached. Not because I legally owed it, I hadn't received anything, but because he'd used their kindness like a resource, had extracted it in my name without my knowledge, and I wanted my name back. I wanted to remove it cleanly from the story he'd sold and return it to myself. Marlo nodded. That's not revenge, she said. No, I agreed. It's something more important than that. Dad announced the holiday dinner 3 weeks out. December. Bigger than usual. His co-workers invited, some friends of friends, people who knew him from his professional life and would be meeting me for the first time through whatever introduction he chose to give. He sent me a message. You're coming. People have been asking about you. Asking about you meant I was expected to appear, to be present, to be the prop that demonstrated his patience and his long-suffering generosity toward the child who'd struggled. I considered not going, sat with that option honestly. Then Marlo said, your exit needs to happen on your terms, not from avoidance, from choice. I thought about that for a long time. She was right. Disappearing was one kind of ending. Showing up and changing the story was something else entirely. I told her I was going. She looked at me for a long moment. Then you need to be completely calm, she said. Everything you do needs to be quieter than what he's doing. That's how it works. I already knew that. Calm was the strategy. Calm was what made truth land without deflection. I prepared the envelopes over 2 evenings, sat at my kitchen table with my records and my checkbook and wrote each one out carefully. The amount matched exactly what each person had given Dad. No more, no less. Inside each envelope, I placed a handwritten note, short, simple, 3 sentences. I never received the funds collected in my name. This is a direct repayment from me to you. I'm sorry you were misled, and I want you to know I appreciate your original intention. I signed each note with my full name. Esme Lang. My hands shook slightly when I sealed the envelopes. Not from fear, from the weight of what I was doing. I was untangling myself from a story that had been built over years. Piece by piece. In rooms I hadn't been standing in. Each sealed envelope was a knot coming loose. I placed them all in a folder, labeled the outside of the folder in my clearest handwriting. Esme. Truth. Looking at those 2 words on the outside of that folder was one of the strangest moments I'd had in recent memory, because my name had been used as a prop for so long. And here it was, attached to something that was finally actually mine. I bought a simple dress 3 days before the dinner. Nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress or compete or prove anything to anyone, just me, just something I felt steady in. I looked in the mirror for a while before leaving, told myself, no performance. You're not there to entertain or to appease. You're there to close something that's been open too long. Marlo hugged me at the door. Whatever happens, don't shrink. I drove to Dad's house. The table was set like an event, real flowers, good plates, the kind of setup that announced this was a stage and Dad was the host. Co-workers I'd never met, his stepmother's friends, people who knew his name before they knew mine. Dad saw me immediately. There she is, he announced too loudly. Like I was a surprise he'd arranged. He spread his arms. Our late bloomer, he said warmly. Late bloomer. A new label, softer sounding than the others, but still a label, still his. I smiled, walked past him without stopping. It was small, just movement instead of the waiting for approval pause he expected. But I felt him register it. The prop had walked past him toward its own chair. Dad had a microphone. Of course he did. He tapped it midway through the meal. The sound cut through the table conversation. Everyone went quiet because that was what you did when someone tapped a microphone. He smiled at the room, wide, warm, the practiced warmth of a man who'd been performing for audiences his whole life. I just want to say, he began, how grateful I am for my family. Applause from people who didn't know us, nods from people who did. He made his way around the table in words, named his stepmother, named coworkers, said things carefully designed to make him sound like the kind of man people wished they were. Then he turned toward me. I felt it before he said anything, the shift in his expression, the sparkle. And here's Esme, he said, voice warm enough to confuse people who didn't know the temperature underneath, the one who never made it. But we keep hoping she will someday. Laughter rippled through the room. My chest tightened so hard I felt it in my shoulders. My hands pressed flat against my thighs. And then I stood up, slowly, deliberately, on purpose. The laughter stopped. The room went quiet in a completely different way. Dad's smile flickered. He hadn't expected movement. I didn't reach for the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood at my height and spoke clearly enough for the room to hear. My name is Esme Lang, I said, and I did make it, through things that don't get mentioned at this table. Complete silence. Dad laughed, too loud, covering something. Oh, come on. She's just, I held up the folder, gently, no dramatics, just present. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm here to correct something. People leaned forward. I could feel the shift, not dramatic, just attention moving from performance to reality. Dad's eyes narrowed. The sparkle was gone now. Something different in its place. Something that looked like panic, wearing a thin disguise of irritation. My stepmother touched her napkin. Esme, she whispered. Don't do this. Don't do this. Which really meant, don't break what we've all agreed to maintain. Don't show people what's underneath. Don't make us acknowledge what we've been comfortable not acknowledging. I looked at her. Then back at the room. I started moving around the table. I placed an envelope in front of my aunt first, quietly, without announcement. Then moved to the next person, and the next. I didn't read amounts aloud. I didn't make a speech about each one. I just placed each envelope where it belonged and said the same sentence each time. I'm sorry you were misled. Dad's voice came across the room. What is this? I finished placing the last envelope. Then I looked at him. It's my name, I said. Calm, measured, returned to me. The room buzzed. Quietly at first, people looking at the envelopes, looking at each other, looking at Dad, doing the math. Dad reached for the microphone. She's having a moment, he said. Trying to reset, trying to reestablish the frame. Reaching for the same move that had always worked. But the relatives closest to me were already opening the envelopes, already reading the notes, and their faces were doing something different from the thin, obedient laughter from before. Their faces were understanding something. I stood calmly, because I knew what came next, and I knew exactly what I was going to do when it arrived. Dad talked over me into the microphone. She's having a moment, he said again, louder this time, trying to fill the room with his version before anyone else's could settle. This is just Esme being, you know how she gets. But the relatives were still reading. My aunt looked up first. Her voice was very careful. You said you were paying her rent. Dad's face shifted. I help in different ways. What ways? My aunt asked. Quiet, but no longer soft. Someone else, further down the table. So where did what we gave you actually go? The room changed. Not explosively. Not with shouting or crashing chairs. Just the specific way a room changed when the performance stopped and people started talking to each other honestly. Dad's smile dissolved into something raw. Are you seriously interrogating me at my own table? Nobody laughed. I looked around the room, let the silence do what I didn't need to say. Then I spoke quietly. Clearly. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm here to stop the story. Then I looked at Dad, held his gaze. You don't get to introduce me anymore. My hands were trembling. My voice was not. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. Deliberately. Like this was something ordinary. Dad moved toward the microphone. His voice had changed now. The warmth was gone completely. What was underneath it was something stripped and desperate. She's ungrateful, he said. Louder. After everything I've done for her. After everything I've tried. A relative interrupted. What did you do? Another. Why doesn't she have the money that was given to you? Dad's head turned, looking for backup, for the nodding faces. For the obedient laughter that had always arrived when he needed it. It didn't come. My stepmother's face was very still, eyes moving. Dad tried one more time. She's always been. He stopped, started again. You don't understand the history. The old labels were there on his tongue. Dramatic, sensitive, difficult. The one who never made it. But the room had held the envelopes now, had read the notes, had done the math, and labels didn't land the same way in a room that had seen the receipts. I reached into my bag, pulled out a spare key to his house, the one I'd had since years ago when I'd stayed there briefly, set it on the table. I won't be available in this way again, I said. Then I looked at the relatives, who'd been misled. If you want to know me, call me directly. I picked up my bag, walked toward the door. Behind me, Dad's voice rose. Esme, don't. But he couldn't command a room that had stopped clapping. The weeks after were quiet in the best possible way. I finished my certification, passed the credentialing exam, started my first position with a billing team at a medical group downtown. Real pay, real benefits, real work I understood and did well. The relatives texted me. Some apologized. Several admitted they'd felt uncertain about Dad's stories for a while, but hadn't said anything because conflict was uncomfortable, and Dad was convincing. I replied to each one, briefly and warmly. Dad sent messages. The cycle was predictable once I recognized the shape of it. Anger first, then an explanation that somehow made everything my fault. Then a period of wounded silence designed to make me reach out. Then something that presented itself as an apology without containing one. I didn't respond. I changed some settings. Blocked what needed blocking. Not dramatically, not with an announcement, just quietly, methodically, the way you cleared a space to build something in. The next Thanksgiving I hosted, Marlo, a few people from the study group, a colleague from my new job who had nowhere to go, small table, real food, no microphone, I lit a candle before people arrived, stood in my kitchen for a moment in the quiet, and understood something that had taken the whole year to clarify. The exit hadn't been unforgettable because it was loud. It had been unforgettable because it was final. Because when he tried to tell my story again, I stood up, corrected the record, and walked out like a woman who knew exactly who she was.